Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another Blender tutorial. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make this really simple nature scene at a very beginner level. So I'm going to take you through how to generate trees and leaves in Blender using the default sapling add-on. I'm going to show you how to use a particle system to make a really simple grass field. And we'll add an HDRI to the background to give it some lighting and set up our camera and do the render. It's going to be all super straightforward, and I'll be doing this at a pretty beginner level, so I'll try to explain everything as best I can as we go along. So let's start by opening up Blender. Here we go. And I'm just going to enable the screencast keys. Okay, so start opening up Blender. We're using version 3.0. And you're just going to delete everything in the scene to begin with. So hit A to select all, and then hit X, and then click delete to get rid of everything. And so you can just quickly save your file with Control S. And let's get started. So the first thing we're going to actually need to do to make this scene is to make the hill. So the hill is going to be pretty straightforward. You're just going to hit Shift A. We're going to add an object to the scene. So you're going to hit Shift A, which stands for Add Object. Go to Mesh and click Plane. And so now you have this plane object in Blender, and you can manipulate it. You can move it around if you hit G on your keyboard and move it around with your mouse. If you want to move it around in a particular direction, you can hit X to move it around in the X direction, Y to move it around in the Y direction, or Z to move it around in the Z direction. You can hit R on your keyboard to rotate it in any of those directions as well, X, Y, or Z. And finally, you can scale this object. So if you hit S, you can make the object bigger or smaller in any of the directions that you want. So we're going to start by making it quite a bit bigger. So we're going to hit S, and if you type in numbers into your number pad now, it'll multiply the factor of scaling by that number. So if you hit S and then type 10 and hit Enter, it'll make it 10 times larger, which is what we want. And now we're going to increase the number of vertices we have to work with. So this is a square. It's got a vertex at each point, which we can see if we go into edit mode. So you'll see up here in the corner that you have different modes. We're in object mode right now, but if we go into edit mode, you can see that we have 4 vertices here. And if we right click on them to select them, we can move them around and change how the shape looks, change how this face basically is defined. Okay, so we're going to increase the number of subdivisions this square has because we want to be able to change its surface in a smooth way. So start by hitting A to select all the vertices, and now hit W, which will open up the vertex context menu, and then click subdivide. And you're going to want to do this a couple more times. So W, subdivide, W, subdivide, W, subdivide, and just do this until you get something that looks quite dense, so 5 or 6 times. And so now you see we have this nice dense grid of subdivisions, and if we click any of the vertices, we can move them around using G, or we can rotate them using R, etc. So we're going to pick a vertex that's roughly like in the middle over here, like right over here maybe, and we're going to click and drag it up. So if you just hit G and Z, it'll drag the vertex up, and it'll make a very little hill, but that's not quite what we want. We want a nice smooth hill, like something you'd find in nature. So to do that, we're going to go up to this top row here, and you'll see this little button here that says proportional editing. And so we're going to click and turn that on, and what you'll see now is when we hit G and Z on the vertex again and bring it up, it brings up the vertices with it. And we can control the sort of radius of this effect by using the scroll wheel. So if we scroll down, it makes it bigger, and we can move it up. And now you see we're getting this nice hill shape. And if we keep sort of doing this combination of moving it up and down and scrolling in and out, we can get any hill shape we like. And so now I've created this one, which almost looks like almost a perfect sinusoid from the side. You can see that we have this nice hill in this fashion. And that's pretty much it. We're actually pretty much done with the hill already. So now before we do anything else, we're going to set up our camera. So to add a camera back to the scene, just do Shift A to add, and then go down to camera, just click camera. And you're going to see now it's added a camera here. And you can switch back in between the camera view and your regular view by hitting 0 on your number pad. So 0, 0, 0, 0. If you don't have a number pad, there are 2 things you can do. First of all, you can just do it with the menu. So if you go to View up here and click Cameras, and then click Active Camera, it does the same thing. Or if you don't have a number pad and you like using keyboard shortcuts, you can go to Edit, and then edit your preferences. And there should be a setting in here to emulate the number pad, which is this checkbox up here. So instead of hitting the 0 on your number pad, you would hit the 0 on your top row of your keyboard. Okay, so let's get back into this. So we have the camera now. We'd like to make it see what we're seeing. So to do that, go to View, Cameras, View, View Align View, Align Active Camera to View. And if you're using the keyboard, you can just do Alt, Control, number pad 0. So now we can see what the camera sees, and it's seeing roughly what we see, which is what we want. And we're going to move it around in a second. But first, you'll notice in the image that I produced, the camera had this sort of vertical aspect ratio, whereas this is more landscape. So we're going to change the dimensions of this camera. So if you go to the second item over here, Output Properties, and just change this from 1920 to 1080p. And then you can scale up this one until it gets something roughly like, golden ratio-esque. That looks about right to me. And now we've sort of framed our scene in a vertical way, and the rest of the composition will flow from that. So we'd like to set up the camera so that it's looking like this, where primarily just sees the hill in the background, and it's not doing that right now. So we're going to sort of zoom into what kind of view we want and hit Control-Alt-0. And then we can move the camera from this viewpoint. So if we hit G, you can move the camera around. You're basically grabbing the camera and moving it around. So we'd like to hit G and then Z, or hit G and Y to move the camera in this direction, and then G and then Z, and we're going to move it up a little bit, and maybe G and then X to move it over here just a tiny bit. So we get this nice little slope, and that looks fine to me. Okay, so we've got our camera set up. We have got our landscape. Now we got to do the tree. So you can jump back out of the camera mode. So just hit 0 on your number pad to jump back out. And we're going to hide the camera and the landscape just because we don't want them to get in the way while we make the tree. So go over here to your panel, your properties panel on the right side here, and you can see all your objects. There's your camera, there's your plane, which is now our hill, so you can rename it by double-clicking on it and typing whatever name you'd like for it. And you can hide this object in the viewport by clicking on this. So this temporarily hides the object in the viewport. We don't need to hide the camera. It temporarily hides the object in the viewport. If you want to hide it in the render, you can click on this camera button. You can see it goes to a little X if you want to turn it back on. So when it's X'd out, it means that it's not going to show up in the render. So when you turn it back on, it'll show up in the render. So now we have a nice empty sort of canvas to work with, and we're going to add the tree. So to do that, you want to go to Edit, Preferences, click on Add-ons, and then just make sure that you have the Sapling Tree Gen add-on enabled. So type sapling in the search bar up here, and then just check it off, and it'll be there for you to use. It should be default in every version of Blender, so you shouldn't need to do anything special to install it. Okay, so now if you go to Shift-A, and up to curve, you'll see a new item in the curve menu, which is a sapling tree gen. Now, before you click on it, this is items like this have when you generate items like this, they have a weird menu that pops up where if you click on anything outside of the menu will disappear. The idea is it's like you're editing the initial properties of the object once, and that's the way it stays forever unless you edit it manually. So I'll show you what that means. So if you click on Sapling Tree Gen, you'll see this menu that shows up here, and this menu actually allows us to change the properties of the object. So for example, you can change different presets, you can make it look different ways. The problem is though, this has a lot of really useful settings that you'll want to go through if you want to make a really custom tree. But if you click anywhere outside of it, including on the object, it disappears and you can never get it back, and you have to start over and get rid of your tree and start over basically. So you're going to add Shift-A, curve, sapling tree gen. Make sure to not click off of this, and you're just going to go to load preset, and we're going to pick the Japanese maple tree set. And you can just use the default one. It looks really nice. We need to give it some leaves though, and so you can do that as part of the sapling tree generator. So if you go to settings and then leaves, you can click show leaves, and I like to make the leaves quite large, so I'll typically give the leaf scale something like 0.25, and then I'll give it a lot of leaves, so something like maybe 50 leaves, or that's just the number. I like this number of leaves. And so now we have our object. You can go through our tree. You can go through all these other settings and play with them how you like. I'll just be using this for now, but you can feel free to explore these. And now we can click off of it onto our tree, and we've got our little tree there. And we're going to give it some texture, some really basic, easy textures. So in Blender, you can edit materials in 2 ways. So before we edit any of the materials, we're going to see what this tree looks like. So let's add a sun lamp. So Shift A, light, add a sun lamp. And if it added it somewhere over there, you want to bring it back to the center by hitting Alt G. So which Alt G takes any object and brings it back to the center. And now you can move the sun lamp around and you can point it however you like. And so we go into rendered mode by hitting Z on your keyboard and then hitting rendered, this top item up there. You can see the tree really well. It's a little dim, so I'm going to turn up the light by going to this panel over here, clicking on the little lamp icon down there, and then choosing strength and turning it up to 3. So now you can see we've got our tree. If we go to our sun lamp, which is still selected, and hit R and rotate the sun lamp around, you can see we've got all this nice, these nice shadows and everything. So this is looking quite nice. Okay, so the 2 ways to edit materials. When you click back on the tree, we're going to edit the tree branch first, like the bark, and then the leaves. So you can add materials in 2 ways. If you click on the object and go over here to this menu, you can see there's a material properties button. You can click new here, and you can add all sorts of materials. So for example, this is a principled BSDF. You can change the color of it, to anything you'd like. You can change how metallic it looks, how reflective, etc. If you want, you can make it glossy or made of glass. So here's our glass tree now. This is a good way to add materials if you just want to do it really quickly. But we're actually going to add the material the second way, which allows for more fine control over how the material is generated. So we're going to open up a new tab to create our material, a new viewing pane. So if you go to the top left corner here, just under the Blender logo, and move your mouse right to the corner, you'll see this little crosshairs pop up. If you click and drag to the right, it's going to open a new window for you. And you can organize your space like this, just clicking and dragging like that. If you want to get rid of a space, you just right-click on the boundary, click Join Areas, and then join in the direction you want to make the panel disappear. So now we have 2 panels open. They're both showing the viewport view, which we don't want. So we want to go up here to this. The viewer mode and pick the shader editor. So instead of editing the mesh, we're going to edit the shader, which is what gives the tree its color. So we're going to give it a new texture, or a new shader, and we're going to call this the tree texture. And you can see it's already added this principled BSDF to the material output. So the way this shader editor works basically is you have this final output, material output thing, and then each of these little blocks that connects to it is like a command that changes some aspect of the shader. So this principled BSDF has lots of settings you can change. So you can change the color, exactly like you did in the material panel over here, and you can actually see the settings change as I change them over here. But there's all sorts of nodes you can add. So unlike in the material view, it's a little bit more difficult to do this in the panel. It's much easier to do this in the node editor. You can mix and match different shaders. So for example, I can add another principled BSDF shader by doing Shift A, hitting search, adding principled, searching for principled BSDF. And now you can see it's added it to this node map. And if I want to mix them together, I do Shift A again, search, add a mix shader, and add it over here. And now I can take the output of one of these. So you can see I'm taking the green output from the BSDF and plugging it into the green shader input. And it's mixing the 2 of these shaders together. So it's mixing this white and blue shader together. So if I make it very red, you can see it's like this pink color, and I can control how it's mixing them back and forth by using this slider here. So we're not going to be doing anything that complicated with it today. We're just going to be adding a simple image texture. So delete the mix shader and that second one if you added it. Go back to your principled BSDF. We're going to add an image texture to this. So if you don't have it enabled already, go to Edit, Preferences, and then search for the Node Wrangler add-on and just make sure that's checked off, this one down here. This will allow us to use a bunch of shortcuts in the node editor that will make everything easier. So click on the principled BSDF and hit Control T. You can see this added 3 nodes and plugged them automatically into the principled BSDF. So it's added a texture coordinate node. You're going to take the generated output from this texture coordinate node and plug it into the vector input. This just makes it so that we don't have to do any UV unwrapping. We can use an automatically generated map to apply an image to this object. You don't have to change anything about the mapping node yet. And then in the image texture, once we have an image we're going to use as the texture, you can just click open and add it. So let's get an image that we're going to use as the texture. So a really good website for this is textures.com. It's got lots of free high quality textures. So if you go to textures.com and just type bark, you can see that there's a ton of images. This one looks pretty good. So if you just click on pine bark, and all we need is the color map. We're not going to do anything fancier than that today. So just click download on the medium, which should be should be fine to download it with just a free account. So you're just going to download it there and go back to your Blender, and wherever you click open and navigate to wherever you downloaded the bark texture to and just select it. And so you can see it's like applying some weird thing here. That's because the mapping isn't perfect. So we're going to change this flat mapping to a box, and now you can see it looks a lot better. You can kind of see a seam and stuff, but this is a very simple render, so we're not going to worry about it too much. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the texture a little bit smaller. So you can see it's kind of big and spread out, and it's like really low resolution. So if you go over here, you can see the scale button, and if we change the value here, let's zoom in on the tree. If we change any of the values here, you can see it changes the scale of parts of the texture in a particular direction. So we're going to change them all, make the texture basically repeat more. We're going to change the scale of the texture by doing Shift-A, search, adding a value node. So you can see now we can take the output of this value node and plug it into the scale. And it just disappeared because right now the value is set to 0. But if we change the value node by clicking and dragging on this, it changes the scale of the texture. And so right around there it actually looks pretty nice out of the box. So I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty okay with that. Okay, so we're pretty much done with the bark. That's as complicated as we're going to go today for a simple render. All right, so next we're going to click on the leaves, and we're going to give them a little texture. So we could give them like a leaf texture in the same way that we gave the bark a bark texture, but actually for a tree like this, if you just click on new and just give it like a red texture, like a faintish red or like a pink, it actually looks pretty nice out of the gate. So you don't need to worry about the leaves for a simple render like this. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. So you can experiment and change whatever colors you like. You know, if you want to make them green, if you want to make them blue even. I like pink because it looks like a cherry blossom tree almost. Make it a little bit. There we go. Sure. That's like salmon pink. There we go. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now we're going to add it into the scene. So we made the hill disappear, but we can bring it back. And hit 0 to get to the camera view. And now you can just click on the tree bark. So if you move the tree around, the leaves will follow. So you don't need to click on both. So hit G and Z to get the tree to sort of line up with the hill. You can rotate it using R a little bit to get it to sort of point in the direction that the hill's plane is facing. And now we're going to scale it down so it shows up in the render. I think the hill's taking up too much of the image, so I'm going to click on the camera and hit G and then Z to bring it up, and then maybe G and then X a little bit to bring it to the side. And now we've got a nice little framed scene with a little tree here, and it looks pretty decent. Okay, so now we're going to work on the grass. So we're going to make everything disappear, so just open up your tree thing here, click on that, make the leaves disappear, make the tree disappear, make the hill disappear, and now we're going to do the grass. The grass is super straightforward. So we're going to make a couple of clumps of grass and then add them to the field using a particle system. So Shift-A to add a plane, and it's probably appeared somewhere off to the side there, yeah. So just add your plane and then hit Alt-G to bring it to the middle. It's just going to put it wherever the cursor is. You can do Shift-C to bring the cursor to the middle, so you don't have to worry about that so much. Okay, so Perfect. So we have our plane there. And now if you hit tab, you'll get back into edit mode, and we can move this around to look, we can transform this a little bit to look more like a blade of grass. First, rotate it, hit R, and then X, and then type 90 to rotate it 90 degrees. And then we're gonna hit S and X to scale it in the X direction, and then hit S and Z to scale it in the Z direction. And now I've got this nice, long, thin blade of grass. Now hit G and Z to move it all up so that the bottom of the grass blade sort of aligns with the origin, which is this little orange dot here. And actually, you can see this grass is like way too big. So scale it down. Let's scale it down in the Z. Yep, and then make it smaller and smaller. Keep bringing it back down to the origin with the G and Z, and I think it looks okay from here. So now we're gonna let's make it a little wider. SX, that makes it a little wider. Okay, so now we're going to give it some curvature. So hit Control, so hover your mouse inside the face here, and then hit Control R, and you can see it's added this little yellow line. This is a loop cut. If you scroll up, it will add more and more loops. So you can do this until you've got like 20 or so loops, and then hit click, and then hit escape, and now you've got a bunch of new vertices to play with. Click on the top two here, and then if you hit R and then rotate in the X direction, you can see it's going to rotate the whole blade of grass. And if you scroll in and out, you can control the direction and severity of that rotation. So you're going to just duplicate it like that, and you're pretty much good at that stage. So you've made a blade of grass. Nice job. Let's color it green. So just add a new material to it. Make it green. Any shade of green you like. I think that's probably fine. You can give it some reflections, so maybe make it a little bit metallic and lower the roughness, which makes it more reflective. And now you're gonna, that's a really neon green. I'm gonna make that like a darker green. There we go. Now you're going to just duplicate it with Shift D, and you're gonna rotate it around. You're gonna rotate it around with R and Z, and then move it around just a little bit in any direction you like. And scale it down, and then you're going to duplicate them both. Hit R, Z, and there you go. You can have, pull them out a little bit like this. Pull them out, and so you're making like this little clump of grass basically. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. And now you've got a single clump of grass. So now you're going to hit select all of them. So right click to select, and then hold Shift to select multiple objects. And then you're going to hit Control J, and that will join them into one object that you can now grab and manipulate. And you're going to hit Shift D, and then grab and move this over, scale this a little bit, put Tab to go into edit mode, and you'll notice that the top vertices of all these are selected. And if you just hit R, you can rotate the blades of grass a little bit, make them look a little different. Let's click on the original one again, hit Shift D, move it over with GY, scale, use S to scale, and then hit Tab again. They're all selected, and now you can rotate it in a, oops, that looks neat. Whoa, that looks cool. Look at that. Now you can, rotate them in a different way to get something looking a little different. So you've got these three different types of grass puffs. So select all of them, and then hit Control G to join them into a collection. We're going to call the collection grass. And now you can scale them down with S, and then just move them far below your scene so they won't show up. Now bring everything back into view by going to the right panel here and just clicking, unblinking the eye. So we've got your scene back. Go into your camera mode with 0. And now we're going to add the grass to the plane using a particle system. So select the plane, go down to here in the right panel called Particle Properties, click on that. Add a new particle system. We're going to call it grass. Just double click to change it. And now you're going to convert the particle system to hair. And you'll see that the particle system is putting particles, it's putting hair even in places we don't want it, which is outside the view of the camera. So here's a little trick you can do. Tab into edit mode, and you'll see that you can see the vertices both in and outside the camera. So now go to this top bar here and use the middle click to sort of move the panel around if you have to. And there's an option over here that says toggle X-ray. So click on that, and it'll allow you to select things even if you can't see them super well. So you can select everything at once without needing to visibly see it in your viewport. So if you hit B now, and sort of, so B is this like this rectangular select thing. So if I hit B and like click and drag, it'll select a rectangular part of the mesh. So if I hit B, I'm gonna line it up so it's just outside the camera view, and I'm selecting all that. So you see I missed a couple there, so I'm gonna go out and do it again. There we go. Hit X to delete those vertices. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do the exact same thing. So B, and then select all these vertices, delete those, and then B, and select all the ones down here and delete those. And so now we have a much smaller hill to work with, but it still looks exactly the same in the camera. But now when we go tab out of edit mode, just by hitting tab on your keyboard, you can see that the hair is more concentrated, which is good because we need fewer hairs to achieve a higher density. Okay, so we're going to go down to render, click on render in the particle properties, and then instead of render as path, we're going to render as a collection, and that collection is going to be grass. We're going to pick random from the collection, and that's pretty much it. You can see it's added the grass now to the plane, but they're all rotated in the wrong direction. So if you click on the particle properties, go to advanced, then click on rotation, and now you can see this is you can choose the orientation. So if you click through, you should be able to find an orientation that puts all of them up, just like this, which looks perfect. And then you can randomize the orientation a little bit to make it look more organic, and you can randomize the phase a little bit to do the same thing. And now if you turn the number up to like 15,000, you have a nice little field of grass there. And you can change the randomness of the scale, which lets you make it look a little bit more organic, and I would even add maybe up to 25,000 blades. There we go. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now we're going to add a texture to the bottom here, to the ground. It really doesn't need to be complicated. We're actually just going to use the same bark texture. So if you click New to give the ground a texture, so this is going to be the ground texture. You can call it ground texture if you like. You're going to click on the principled BSDF again, hit Control T, and we're going to do the same thing as before. So go from generated to vector, and then just click right on open, pick our texture, and there you go. So now the ground has this nice brown color, and you don't really need to worry about it more than that. It's good enough for a simple render like this. Okay, so now we're going to start making the scene look pretty. So first of all, we've been using Eevee this whole time, but we're going to want to switch to using cycles, which will look a lot better. So click on Eevee. In this right panel over here, click on Render Properties, click on Render Engine, pick Cycles. And now it's rendering everything. So if you have a GPU, you can switch to GPU Compute, which will be a little faster. You want to go to Output Properties, which is the next tab down, and just click Render Region. And that will only restrict the rendering to this camera region, which is what we want, because it'll help it render faster. And instead of using the sun lamp, we're going to use an HDRI. So if you open up your browser and go to some place like, if you just Google free HDRI download, you can go to a place like Polyhaven and you can download a bunch of HDRIs. So an HDRI is basically a high dynamic range image. It is a map that applies, it's a 360-degree map that you put in your Blender file, and it lights your scene based on that map. So it gives you really realistic lighting. The most realistic lighting in 3D art comes from HDRIs, basically. So you can pick any one that you like. So if you go to Assets, HDRIs, if you want an outdoor one, which kind of makes sense, you can pick, like nature, and pick maybe a morning, afternoon one. Like here's one that would have some nice trees in the background, or like this one. I've already got an HDRI downloaded, but basically just pick one, click on, download it in like 8K if you can, or 4K if not. Just hit the download button, wait for it to download, and then if you go back to your scene, delete the sun lamp, and now go down to the World Properties tab here in the right panel, and instead of having a color for the background, which you can change by using this thing, click on this little yellow dot and then pick Environment Texture, then click Open, and then go to your HDRI and select that. So this is the HDRI I'm using, and you can immediately see we need to make a couple tweaks to some of the colors of stuff. So for example, we've got the grass. Let's make that grass color like a lot darker and like less neon green. I think that looks a little better. So that looks fine from there. I'm gonna bring this up a little bit so you can't see the ground as much. Okay, and actually you can move your camera around. It's perfectly acceptable to reorganize your scene composition and setup like this at this stage. So I'm gonna hit R, and then I'm gonna rotate it in the X direction and rotate it so it's pointing up a little bit. And then I'm gonna grab G and then Z and move it down, so I'm sort of looking up at the tree with the HDRI in the background. So I think that looks a little bit better. Maybe I can even move it down a little more. How far? There we go. Okay, so that looks okay. Maybe move it to this way a little bit. Okay, so you can see we've got this nice thing in the background. If we move out of the camera view, we can see the whole scene is being rendered using this HDRI, and it looks quite nice. Okay, so go to your shader editor, and instead of editing an object shader, we're now going to edit the world map shader. So just click up here, click on world, and then you can see this is our HDRI. This is the background strength. So if we play with this, it makes the scene brighter or darker. And now you're going to click on you're going to click on your HDRI node and just hit Control-T, and that will add a mapping node to it, which you can use to change the rotation. So if you change this rotation Z value, you can see how the lighting in your scene changes. And if I rotate it like this, you can get like some nice lighting effects on the grass, and it looks pretty sweet. You can even change it to look like that if you want, which would look pretty wild. So you can do a lot of stuff with that. You can get it backlit if you want the sun from behind. I'm just gonna stick with something simple like that, and that looks fine. So we're pretty much almost done here. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little depth of field. So depth of field always makes things artsy and adds a little bit of grounding to your scene. So all you got to do to add depth of field is really straightforward. Just go to Shift A and then add an empty. So an empty in Blender is an object that doesn't show up in a render, doesn't do anything, it just indicates a position basically. So you can see it right there. I'm moving it around, and I'm going to place this empty right in the middle of the branches here. You can make it a little bigger if you want to see it more clearly. So this empty is going to be our focal point for the scene. We're going to go to the camera, click on the camera, and then go down to the camera settings, and then check off depth of field, and then select the empty as our depth of field. So if you turn this this f-stop way down, you'll get this nice blurring in the background, and I'm going to turn it down even more to show you what I'm talking about. So now if I move the empty, which is our depth of field, our focal point, forward and back, you can see the scene gets blurrier because it's focusing on the empty. So if I just move it like right there, you can see it looks very nice. And I'm gonna turn the f-stop up just a little bit, maybe 0.25. Okay, so now we have this nice scene. It's got this nice lighting, some low poly grass, a really simple tree, and you're pretty much done. Most nature scenes are constructed in this way, where you just start by building the elements up. You can make more complicated textures. You can play with the settings of the trees more, add more complicated, more beautiful leaves. Use subsurface scattering on plants and mushrooms and stuff like that. Add more complicated lighting. But everything sort of boils down. Everything comes from this super simple setup of create the models, texture, light, and render. So we're going to render this now. I'm going to, by hitting function F12, and it's just going to take a second. I'm not going to let it render out all the way. I'm just going to wait for it to get to like 150 samples, and then we'll do a couple quick compositing tricks, and we'll be done. So I basically can't really even see any noise anymore. It's at 200 samples, so I'm just going to kill it by hitting X. And the render is done now, so if you hit function F11, you'll see this is our final render, or our almost final render, our raw render. And now if you see this strip of tabs at the top, layout, modeling, sculpting, etc., go over to the compositing tab, and this will allow us to do some post-processing for the image. So just click on if you see this, like these two corners right here, just click on this one up here and drag it to the left. This will open up another view. We're going to click on the editor type and go to image editor. And now we're going to click in the node window here for the compositor, and you click use nodes. So we have our render layers outputting to the final composite, which is the final image. And if we hit Control Shift and then click on render layers, it'll output it to a viewer node. You can see the viewer is putting out the final image in the backdrop. You can turn that off by clicking here, and instead put the backdrop over here by clicking on this little drop down and selecting viewer node. This basically just allows you to see what you're doing without it being in the background. And confusing your node map. So we're just going to add a little bit of glare to make the scene pretty. So hit Shift A, type glare, and then insert this node. You can move the node around until this bit hovers white. Hover it over this connection between the render layer and the composite until it hovers white, until it glows white, and then just change this to fog glow, and then change the threshold down to like 0.2, and then Control Shift and click on the glare node. and you can see the settings apply to the viewer node. If you change the threshold, if you bring the threshold up, less glare is applied. If you bring the threshold down, more glare is applied. I think 0.2 looks fine for this scene. I think the grass is too green, so you can change the colors in the compositor too. So Shift A and search for RGB, and you have an item here called RGB curves. So you're going to insert that into your scene, pipe the output to the viewer node, and now you can change how the colors are in the scene. So if I pull this green, if I click on this green thing down here and I pull it, click on this dot in the middle and pull it back, it makes the scene less green. And you can do that with all these colors. So you can make the scene more blue or less blue, and do whatever you like to the scene. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's a super simple nature scene in Blender. This tutorial is more geared toward beginners, but I'm sure I sipped over some stuff. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you like this kind of fast-paced tutorial style. I'm kind of experimenting with some different pacings and teaching styles. So I'm all ears for feedback. Yeah, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.